All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sarthak, and this is True Calling. Our guest today is Jason Scharf. Jason has spent nearly 2 decades pursuing his life's mission of catalyzing innovation. As an early stage investor, he targets the bioinnovation tech stack and the business of health. He has held key leadership roles in strategy and market intelligence at industry leaders such as Illumina, BD, and Amgen. Through the Austin Next podcast, which is his podcast, and his writings, he explores innovation, bio and health, tech ecosystems, Austin, and their convergence. So, what did we talk about? We talked about Paul Graham's essays, specifically, what is the message Austin is sending as a city? We talked about his big pivot from wanting to be a mad scientist in college to then switching over to becoming an investor. What to do when you don't know which path to follow? Trends in healthcare that we don't think are going to stay in the next 10 years. Why the cost of medicines is so high in the US. More concepts around human agency and how the longevity movement is changing the definition of what agency means. Thoughts on Bryan Johnson and much more. Also, a fun note at the end, I pitched an idea to Jason, and you can see his real-time feedback on my idea. I hope you all enjoy this conversation, and I will catch you guys soon. So we can just dive straight into it.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for joining.
Absolutely.
I've been listening to your pod since I went to the walks. You know, I was like maybe a year or two ago. So I've gained a lot of understanding of Austin as an ecosystem through your podcast, Austin Next. And I wanted to jump straight into what Austin means to you. So to start this off, have you read Paul Graham's essay on cities and ambition before? So I'll just
It's come up on the podcast. Yeah, it has come up when I had L on from the Boardwalks. We actually talked about it.
Yeah, so I wanna take an excerpt from that. So he says, "Great cities attract ambitious people. In 100 subtle ways, the city sends you a message. You could do more. You should try harder. The surprising thing is how different these messages can be. New York tells you, above all, you should make more money. There are other messages too, of course. You should be hipper. You should be better looking. But the clearest message is that you should be richer. And then Silicon Valley, the message it sends you is you should be more powerful." So the question I have for you is, what's the message Austin is sending?
I think is you should have a mission. Because what I'm noticing more, and I've kind of had this discussion a couple of times, is the companies that are starting to be fitting into that kind of generational category, or could be generational category, seem to be more mission driven, right? So we're having a big defense tech hub here, right? And there's a mission behind that, right? You even think about SpaceX, coming here, Tesla coming here. One of our, Icon is about solving housing. So a lot of them are very, I'd say, mission driven. And so I think it's kind of a twist, and I think it gets into kind of the nature of Austin on what you're talking about with Silicon Valley, because it rhymes with Silicon Valley, with be more powerful, but it's that next question of like, what do you do with that power? And it's like, okay, I've got this mission. I want to then change the world in some way, shape, or form.
It's like having a bigger purpose.
Yeah, having a bigger purpose, having a mission, having like what's the one line? When you think about in many ways, and I've heard people say like back to what Silicon Valley was in the early 2000s, like Google's was like index the world's information, so things along that line. And I don't want to say it's a cynicism like we are what Silicon Valley was 20, 30 years ago. I think there's other underlying factors in kind of the first principles to it. But I think that's what it is. And I think that's because you haven't seen a lot recently those kinds of companies start to build up and be different. Because we think about Paul Graham's comment about like you to be more powerful, right? And I can make the next great big SaaS company and be powerful, but that's not necessarily a mission-driven company, right? We've had some of those here, but when I'm looking at the waves that are coming now, they really are about reshaping and solving really large problems in the real world. I think that's the other thing. It is this kind of I think we can get to it. This convergence of like the digital and the physical.
Yes. So speaking of mission, as I was researching about your own sort of life's mission of catalyzing innovation in your own way, I came across, well, we're both fellow Tridents. We both went to UCSD. Which college were you in, by the way?
I was in Marshall.
Let's go. Okay. So, when you were in college, you wanted to be a scientist. You wanted to be a mad scientist. You wanted to get into that. And then you went to this one class, this lab that you went for, right? Where you kind of were like, okay, this is not what I want to do. Can you talk me through?
Oh, I got a job in a lab is actually what happened.
Okay.
It was three things at once, right? So I went into undergrad at UCSD with the intention of getting I was a molecular biology undergrad with planning on going the PhD route, right? Because I wanted, since I was like in 7th grade, first I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, do things, build in space. And then somehow I discovered DNA and became obsessed with that. And then, wanted to be a mad, I kind of joked about like being the mad scientist without actually understanding what it meant to be a scientist. And so kind of three things happened kind of simultaneously. One was I got a job at something called the Burnham Institute, doing as a lab assistant or whatever you want to call it, in a glycobiology lab. Was taking then biochemical techniques, so kind of that first lab class in upper division, and then taking structural biochemistry, so kind of the upper division of molecular. And the kind of the three things at once. So one, from the biochemical techniques classes, I realized that I'm really, really bad in the lab. Like, just, it's not a skill set I necessarily have. The second thing is then I'm in the lab and realizing that my entire job is I take clear liquid from one vial to another and occasionally hoping something shows up. And I remember asking my postdoc, I was like, what is it we're doing here? And I remember giving we had this 45-minute conversation about, the surface proteins and the cancer research they were doing. That was the most interesting day that I had there. And the next day I went back to pipetting and I'm like, I can't do this. This is not what I should be doing. And then I'm finishing up in my structural biochemistry class and I remember alpha helixes and beta sheets and I'm taking the finals and I'm going like, I have no idea why proteins fold, but I know that they should, and I can't do this. And so it was not a good fit for me. I always joke, I married a PhD instead. And so like that, it was kind of this cloudy moment of not really understanding what it was that I wanted to be doing. And my father's one piece of advice to me going into college was you have to just take one economics class. And so I took the first macro class, ended up not taking the final and getting an A. And realizing, I was like, what, do you all not know what interest rates are? Do you not know how this all works? And of course, realizing in hindsight, like, no, not everybody kind of grew up getting that kind of drilled into them. And then ended up getting my degree in writing and economics, got a job right after I left the lab doing PR for life science companies. And that's when the light bulb went on. I'm like, oh, the business side of science. That was kind of the first big shift that I had in realizing that I knew enough about science and understanding what was going on. I can get deep enough to be dangerous, but not to the level of that I wanted to be a scientist.
So let's talk a little bit about that because, the people that listen to this podcast are between the ages of 18 and 30 typically. And there's an underlying sense of lack of purpose or not knowing which way to point your compass in, which direction to point your compass in. And college is a huge catalyst for these sort of things, right? When you were in that space, when you were like, okay, dude, all my life since 7th grade, I wanted to be a scientist, and then you actually do the work that you think you would be doing, and you're like, wait, this is nothing like what I expected it to be like. What is a step someone can take in that moment when they're feeling clouded?
It sucked. That much I still remember. It happened twice in my life. That was the first time when I had a very clear path. I was like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, step A, step B. The best thing I can think of to say is rather than asking in the clouded moment, but more experiment more, take more risks, especially as you're younger, to see these different things. I had this vision of the mad scientist and playing it without actually knowing what it meant. And so I think that trying those different things early and just saying, I'm going to try this for a little bit, I'm going to try that, even if you have a path, even if it's like, this is the direction that I want to be going, I think is something that is really valuable, especially today and tomorrow and the way things are going with the speed of technological change. I mean, it's actually a podcast that's coming up, or it may even be out by the time this one comes out, with the chief revenue officer of Udemy. We're talking about what skills and things you should be learning, and how do you think about skills that are important this second versus not, versus like in 2 years, they won't be. So the example we were giving was, should you take a course on prompt engineering? And so like prompt engineering is probably useful right this second. Is it going to be useful in the long run? Probably not. We're probably going to get the AIs and LLMs, the interface to be better, that I don't have to be super good at coming up with the perfect prompt to get it to do what I want. So it's always an interesting balancing act of, can I try these little experiments? Can I learn these types of skills? And then breaking them into the buckets of what's going to serve me in the long term, that this is a, no regret action, serve me forever, or this is a small skill, small experiment that I can do something quickly and gain information, gain insight, and do something about.
What is the skill you're currently trying to learn?
I mean, I love playing with all the AIs and all of that. This has been the few times I always joke, I wish I was 25. And part of it actually is then, since I have like young kids, that I actually learn a lot through their eyes and the ways that they're playing with it and just seeing the different types of questions that they are asking. So I think constantly trying to learn these new tools. Now, on one hand, it's funny, while I said I wasn't a good fit for a scientist, I am constantly now trying to be much more technical. I'd say that I am. One of the interesting things, or the problems that I have in my space, is there's so much convergence of technology, which is what is the opportunities that is out there. I need to be able to quickly learn and understand all of these different technologies, at least at 1 or 2 layers down, so that I'm having a conversation, I know what's going on. Now, what's changed is we have these types of tool sets like AI, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, or whatever, that makes it a lot easier. I mean, I'll be listening to a podcast, driving home. I'll stop. I'll turn on ChatGPT, the voice mode of ChatGPT, and say, like, can you explain RAG? Can you explain this, that, or the other thing, so that I'm getting better context of what's going on? Like, that instantaneous learning just wasn't available before.
Yeah. So you go into the PR side of life sciences, and this is in San Diego. What are the learnings from that career, honestly, like being in PR? What do you see, especially for such a highly technical field?
Oh, it's interesting. I learned it's come a lot full circle on that, because at the time I ended up saying like, oh, I don't want to do PR. At that moment, what I ended up doing, we did PR for a big deal between, I think it was J&J and Amgen. And that was the moment of like, I want to do that. I want to make those deals happen. So that was kind of my foray, saying like, I want to head towards biz dev because that sounds really cool and that's a lot of fun. What I didn't quite realize, that I think is something that's kind of stood in the back of my head, is just the power of storytelling and narratives, and just how important it is to really get that understanding out there, especially, and you hit it, on such technical fields. Like, what does it actually mean? Like, especially someone like myself who's an investor, the absolute worst pitches I get make me feel like I'm sitting through a scientific seminar. I'm like, I don't know what's happening. And it's funny because there's so much taken for granted. I always make this joke, but it's not really a joke. I'll have people present data in a pitch deck, but you have to understand who you're talking to. Even if you have a bar chart, if you haven't explained, is high good or bad? Like, you're just like, here's my data, it's awesome. I don't know what I'm looking at. If you think about any of this kind of communication, you're likely to be the expert who's communicating it, and no one else is. I mean, they always talk about like, can you communicate it to a 5-year-old, to a 16-year-old, to an expert, and so forth. Like, communication and storytelling is vitally important for startups, communicators, companies, regions. And I think that's one of the things that I think stuck in the back of my head. So as I said, I ended actually being a creative writing major. It was what my final degree was in. So it is something that's always kind of sat, and especially in today's social media and the amount that I write, it's a skill that it kind of sat back there, but it's kind of come a lot back to the forefront.
Wow. So let's dive into this, Austin as an ecosystem. where you're at right now with, the convergence of tech and healthcare and biosciences, life sciences, what are some trends that you're seeing in healthcare, in health in general, that you think are not going to kind of stand the test of time?
They're not going to stand. What's not going to stand the test of time is the current business model that we have of health. So if you think about what's going on in health today, the bio-innovation tech stack is so rapidly evolving. And I mean that in the best way possible, right? We have CRISPR, so we're able to really, cut and paste DNA. You have, the ability to, you have really interesting wearables. You have all sorts of new data sets. You have new types of, classes of medications like, everyone's Ozempic, like GLP-1s. All of those create entirely new sets of things, like cures are on the table. We can actually help people lose weight. Real preventative medicine's on the table. What's happening from that is it's crashing into the entrenched legacy healthcare system. They don't know what to do with it. And so I mean that from the perspective of either they're like, okay, let's take an example of a company called Pear Therapeutics. So Pear Therapeutics had a app, clinical evidence, FDA approved, patients loved it. Payers didn't know what to do with it. And so it went bankrupt because they never could get a reimbursement model. Okay. A lot of people then were like, oh, well, then clearly payer didn't know what it was doing. I was like, that might have been more of an issue with the payer side, right? Or you have the other side, you have GLP-1s. Everyone's like, they're bankrupting us. Everyone's using them. I don't know if you've seen the data, but obesity's gone down for the first time in like 45 years.
Really?
Yes. So they're working. I've had other situations. Have you heard of xenotransplantation?
No.
All right. So xenotransplantation is, if it works, they're still in the phase. They take usually be pig organs. They take pig organs, they modify them genetically, and then people can use them.
Interesting.
So in theory, if they work, it solves the organ shortage. There are people complaining about those are going to cost too much. We can't use those. Solves the organ shortage. You have another example there there's a company called Intellia, I think is how you pronounce it correctly. It has a CRISPR-based therapeutic. They had data come out recently that said, hey, it may be a one-shot opportunity. Their stock tanked after that because we don't have a business model for how you deal with a one-shot. So because of all of this, we need innovation on the business of health as well. We need new models. We need new ways of delivering care. We need ways to think about it so they can actually catch all of these different types of innovations. And then you unlock a flywheel that the more they can catch these types of things, the more that you can have these amazing innovations. Then you've got a great circle or flywheel that's unlocked. If you think about like preventative, everyone says, oh, we don't have health care, we have sick care. You're right, because we have a business model for sick care. Yeah. You get sick, I give you a drug, you pay me for the drug. Great, we've got this set up. The closest thing that we have to healthcare from a business model is the gym. Well, if you sign up for the gym and don't go, my operating margins get better.
Yeah.
That's not a really good aligned model for your healthcare and in the business of health. We're going to see a lot more, I think, innovation on those two sides. And as they come together, now, because of what's going on there, you think about things like AI drug discovery and all that. Yes, what's not going to stay? If we have a situation where, and I'm going to put the regulatory pin in it for a second, but I think that's rapidly going to change as well. If we have 40 to 50 drugs a year approved, right? If you have 1,000 drugs approved a year, the $1 billion drug model, like that doesn't work anymore. Well, that's how Pfizer, that's how Merck, that's how all of these guys survive. That's the entire model, right? If you look at the entire market cap, everyone's like, here, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, they're heading towards $1 trillion. No, they're not. They have one drug that is driving towards that. So these are individual products. If you have all of these drugs that are out there, the model looks different. It probably looks something closer to Apple, right? It looks more like, okay, here I get a cut of each one, but that means that each drug in and of itself is probably a lot cheaper. So I see over time that you're going to see a value migration away from the drugs, devices, and diagnostics themselves. They become more plentiful. They become cheaper towards the actual tech stack like we do have in tech and the business of health. Those are the things that will actually be the drivers of healthcare.
Since I came to the US from a different country and seeing the healthcare system here versus in India, I've always wondered, and I've had these conversations with friends, and I've never been able to completely understand why the cost of medicines is so high. Like, do you have any idea on that front? Like, why is it that it costs like $500, $600 for like the same medicine that I get in India, which is like $5?
Okay, there's lots of different parts to that. Okay, so the global difference is, the short version is, India's riding off of the US. You should be paying, India should be paying more. So right now is the biggest thing that's happening is that the bulk of you got to remember is in the current, forget my future world, the current system, right?
Yeah.
Is if you look at like the Tufts study, it takes $1 billion to make a single drug. And the cost of that is not just the R&D cost for that drug, the clinical trial cost for that drug, it's all of the drug failures as well. Yes, the second drug may cost pennies, but the first one to make is $1 billion, right? And then you have a limited patent lifespan from that. So, and everybody knows, well, if the US is going to pay the exorbitant amount, I can then just ride the coattails off of that. So that's the first part, is that all the countries around the world are paying lower prices because essentially they can get away with it because the US is paying higher prices.
So the US is doing the upfront cost for the discovery and research and the actual
the upfront cost
manufacturing.
and the downstream cost, and basically subsidizing by paying more. That's part one. Because one of the things you notice is there's been talk in the US number of times about, well, why don't we just do reimportation from Canada? Canada's paying less than us, so we'll just import the drugs back in from Canada, and then we'll be paying less for those drugs. The number one place that is against that is Canada, because what Canada knows what will happen next is then the pharmaceutical companies will say, fine, it's not the US and Canada, it's the North America or the US-Canada market. Maybe one market, and we're going to charge you all the same, which will cause Canada's prices to go up.
Interesting.
So that's why there is the cost disparity across the globe.
Yeah.
When you think about now, why is there the cost within the US? Because we're paying higher prices across the board, right? And let's ignore that's the drug side. Let's just say overall, right? So one is you have this really weird 3-part or almost 4-party system, right? So you have the patient, who in many ways is the least important. You have the actual customer, who's the employer. You have the payer, and you have the clinician. Okay, so the payer it's a very weird dynamic, right? Because I always like to point out there are two different categories of medicine that have seen higher quality and lower pricing throughout history: LASIK and elective plastic surgery. They've gotten better over time, and they've gotten cheaper because there is no weird multi-stakeholder situation. It's purely free market.
Interesting.
So you pay, there's no insurance that's going to cover elective plastic surgery. They're not going to cover LASIK.
Yeah.
You're just going to go in, you want to pay for it. If I think you're too expensive, I'm going to go over here. You have transparent pricing. And so it's an always interesting thing that we have from there. Even employer-based health insurance is a quirk of history. So it was a very niche product that I think it was Blue Cross invented like in the late 20s or early 80s. And then during World War II, because the government didn't want a lot of talent moving across different companies, they put in wage controls. They said, you cannot offer increasing wages to different talent to get them to move. Well, companies said, well, we want to get talent anyways. Hey, look, there's this product out there. Why don't we offer employer-based health insurance as a benefit to get people to move? And then it took off. So it wasn't for any good reason that we have it. So we have that quirk. We have this really overly complicated, overly regulated system. I think one of the things you'll notice that almost every single time we pass a law to help the system, it causes more convolution.
I've had Ganesh on, Padmanabhan. I know you know
Yeah.
him, and something we were talking about is what is healthcare incentivizing right now, and you kind of touched on this right now. Is like it's not incentivizing the patient as of right now to do things preventatively as much, because they do benefit off of people coming in to the hospital, to whatever, to get those drugs. But now at the same time, we have I think there's general awareness that people have of, especially in Austin, about just taking care of your health, and that it's led to a lot of consumerization of these products. People buying, a watch, for example, or whatever that might be. What is happening in that space when it comes to healthcare, like consumers specifically?
So I put that right into that business of health category. That really is what it is. Is how do we come up with new models? One of the things is always is, it's not always about the tech, right? It's not always, I mean, it's funny, right? So I remember this was, I don't know, a decade ago or something, and I'm having lunch with a good buddy of mine who was an ER doctor, and he was like, I've got a new Apple Watch, and it gives me my heart rate. I was like, awesome. What are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
And you didn't have a good answer, right? Now, obviously, there's been some interesting stuff with the heart rate variability, like, go to the hospital now. Like, that's an actual insight. So,
or if you fall,
yeah, exactly. So one of the things that we've had, I think some of the problems in the consumer side has been, we have lots of stuff, like insights, data. We're seeing all 23andMe, in all of its problems right now, because they're just like, I've got data for you. Maybe I might have an insight for you, but we're lacking the action. We're lacking the follow-up. We're lacking the, how do I actually do something about it? And so I think that's where you're going to start seeing, I think, the stronger part, because behavior change is hard, right? There is do you know who Clayton Christensen is?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Innovator's Prescription is his healthcare book. And it was written 2009, 10, 11, right about that time. Fantastic book. And there's a graph in it that sits rent-free in my mind still to this day. So the x-axis is behavior change required. Y-axis is feedback loop. Okay, so top left-hand corner, high feedback loop, low behavior change required. Okay, farsightedness. You can't see, you put on glasses, you can see. Not a lot of energy you need to do anything there, right? Top right-hand corner, that is high feedback loop, high behavior change required. Type 1 diabetes. It is a lot of energy and effort to do anything for this, and to, you have to monitor, you have to get the insulin, you have to monitor what you're eating. If you don't do that, you're in the hospital, you're dead the next day. People who have type 1 diabetes will learn and understand this, right? It's the high feedback loop. Bottom right-hand corner, that's the evil zone, right? That's low feedback, high behavior change, cardiac disease, obesity, etc. If I eat the cookie, nothing happens, right? If I go to the gym, nothing happens, right? And so when I think about any sorts of healthcare, especially when you think about the consumerization or preventative or any of that, is how do you move things from that corner to anywhere else, right? Either to higher feedback loop, ideally. Well, that's why have we seen Ozempic take off, is because essentially it's moving the behavior change. Instead of exercising all these things, I can just take a shot, I can take a pill, I can take or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the key, I think, with a lot of these is, how do I change these things in it to make it easier for me? And when you talk about, we kind of like about incentivizing is just some way of changing the feedback loop, right? Whether it's I get the thing I want, that can be I can see now, or the pain goes away or whatever.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about gamification in this stuff. I haven't seen any of it really work. I do remember there was one, this was a while ago, like I was trying out an app that was like, they take a picture of you, they age you like 40 years, and it was text messages from you in the future to get you to do things. Eventually, my response to it was, I deleted it.
Wow.
I was like, just feel like I'm being scolded by something. It wasn't actually driving.
I think negative reinforcement versus positive reinforcement.
Now, what's an interesting thing with the levels of personality that we're getting, maybe we're getting into too much in her category, but I always like the Jarvis mental. I don't know why we went from Terminator to her and we skipped over Jarvis. Like, Jarvis is the one positive, embodiment in that we have of AI kind of in fiction, but we went immediately to kind of the negative. Now, granted, I like her better than Terminator. Like, one's melancholy, one is, apocalyptic. But, I wonder if that, as coach, partner, whatever words you want to use, might be better, because look, behavior change is hard. I always kind of get this when a lot of people who are like the anti-Ozempic crowd are like, it's bad, it's all these kind of different things, and like they should be eating right and exercising. I'm like, I agree with you, we've been saying this for 50 years. Like, getting people to change behavior is not easy, and there are larger things like, yes, we should have, why do we have corn syrup and everything? We have corn syrup and everything because we subsidize corn. So like, yes, I'd like us also to get rid of generalized incentives and everything, let it all kind of fall out where it may.
Yeah.
But when I think about the tools and those in place, I think that's what would be interesting. And so with the business side of health, and Austin's becoming really interesting in that, because you've got companies like Humanot, you've got companies like Love Life, which is John Mackey from Whole Foods company. Peter Tia has his new company here. So you've got lots of Harbor Health, which is kind of starting up. That's less on the preventative side, but more on the just rethinking how we approach health. They're approaching the business side differently, and then allowing, again, that innovation tech stack, allowing all sorts of new capabilities to come into play. And I think those two things coming together, which is one of the reasons I think that Austin is really powerful to sit in that place, because it's contrarian, counterculture, whatever term you want to use, but it's different than the current pathway. If I want to go make the next small molecule, make the next CAR T, make the next standard therapeutic, yeah, go to Boston. That makes perfect sense. Like, that's where you want to be doing that. That's where the capital makes sense to be doing that. If you're trying to create a different business model with different tool sets, you making it a bit harder to do that in the standard place to do that.
I mean, it touches on the first question we had, which was on the message that Austin's sending. And I think a lot of it is around this, not just like doing things that's like, bigger, more purposeful or mission oriented, helps more people, but also doing it your own way. And that's the contrarian side of it. How can you find your own way of doing it? You touched on something there right now, which was that framework, by the way, is amazing. It visualizes everything very clearly. The hardest thing for most people is to find the agency in that, right? Like right now, currently, we just have data, but we don't know what that data leads to or how to make sense of that data. So how do you think these sort of innovations that are going to be happening will change human agency?
It's funny when you're primed to hear something. This is like the fourth time I've talked about agency in like the last 3 weeks. It's kind of come up because there's been, I think we have more agency than we think about.
Firstly, can you define what agency means?
The way I'm thinking about it, and I'm sure the people who would disagree, just the ability to make a choice. And I think that might be where people would disagree, because there are going to be levels, like how significant and how powerful that choice is going to obviously be different. But I think there are levels, like everybody can make a choice, and you can choose to just like ride on a rail, or you can choose to make a choice. And again, it's not even saying that like you have to make a different choice or control, but you can even say like, I like the rail, I like this part. And so like some of the conversation was having in this recently was about how, I know I'm going to get the numbers wrong, it was like SpaceX is like 20,000 people and Boeing is 100,000 people. And at this point, SpaceX is running circles around them, and Boeing is essentially a zombie company, and they're trying to get rid of their space division, and it's not really working. And I asked the question, like, how many people at that company have agency or are choosing any agency? Because if you're going there at this point, like, what is the choice? What is it like? Or would they be freed if that didn't exist anymore? Right? And so when I think about, so that was the question. So then you make a choice of anything, just like the food you want, like the food you eat, the people you hang around with, the people you date, marry, whatever. I think we have a lot more choice in that. And then you can change your life. You can be happy with your life. I think it's when you choose not to take any sense of agency and everything's external, everything's outside. Well, one, I think you're not going to be happy, because it's just like the world is happening to me rather than me being something around, in the world.
Where do you see, and I don't know if you've looked too much into this side of it, psychedelics come into this picture to help explore your agency? So
I've never done them.
Your as in like someone's agency.
Yeah. I'm saying no, but I know people who have. I don't know, and it's funny because I've seen. I definitely think that psychedelics. Okay, I'm going to answer it in a couple of ways. I think that psychedelics as a class of medication are interesting, because I know some of the work that like with like PTSD and depression, I think there's definitely something there. And back to our kind of pull back the regulatory part and things not understanding, there was a psychedelic that went all the way to the FDA. Lykos, thank you. And it failed because of trial design, but it's like, you can't have a blinded psychedelics trial. If you take it, you take it. Like, this is back to the FDA at this point is so behind in trying to understand. It's so structured around the same thing that's been around forever.
Yeah.
And it's like psychedelics, AI, all of these things don't fit that paradigm. And so either things are going to start going around it, it's going to be flooded. We're in this moment now. I mean, there was this great podcast with Amy Abernathy, who used to run the FDA, and Vijay Pandey from Andreessen Horowitz and their Bio and Health Fund, all about all the ways that the FDA is not prepared for AI. So drove from the pure volume and then just understanding, because you think about it, the FDA is structured of, you have a thing, now you give me all the data, great, I'm going to pass the thing. Oh, you want to change the thing? Well, start over and wait 5 years. That's not the way AI works. That's not the way any of this kind of stuff works.
Yeah.
I got the thing and I'd like it to change the next day as soon as I have more information.
Yeah.
So all that being aside, back to your agency and psychedelics question, I don't know, because it's interesting. I've seen this recently, and I haven't had a discussion about the number of people who've done psychedelics and then essentially walk away from what they were doing, so that it's not fried's not the right word, but it almost like completely changes who they are.
Yeah.
And so then there's a question of, and again, I'm seeing this from afar, so I don't know anybody in this kind of situation, so it's hard for me to say. But there's a question of, what does that do to your agency? I don't have a good answer.
No, because, you're talking about, you have a choice. And at the same time, a lot of our choices are determined by our previous, our past. Even though we don't want to say that our choices are going to be, we're going to just completely change something, going back to your behavioral change thing. It's like, no, we do things a certain way as humans, and we're fine with doing those things a certain way. But then there's these, psychedelics is an example of it, these therapies that are just completely rewiring the way that we think about ourselves and the behaviors we associate with ourselves. So is there a way that we can make these choices with the help of such tools, is the question. Same thing for education, honestly. You're going into college, and we have a new college, you were there, UADX here. That is a level of behavior change. The way that you go about teaching someone the mental model for the world, if it's not that siloed and it's not in a single place, you make them think about the world and act in a different way about the world. So how do these tools sort of play together to create that agency that we're looking for?
I think it's a lot of these things. I mean, to your point, I think we're back to trying to build a world of agency, and I think it is trying to, I don't think you need, okay, I think psychedelics might be a bit of an extreme, but I think it's just stepping back and starting with making an active choice. And you're right. I mean, look, past dictates. I always thought it was funny, the whole nature versus nurture conversation, because I was like, well, in nature, it's my genetics, and in nurture, it's my behavior.
Yeah. So
in either situation, how my children grow up is a lot revolving around what I've done. So that's my whole, I'm pretty involved in all of these kinds of situations. Yet some of it's a little more probabilistic than the direct action that I take and the balance, but it still feels like it's just a mindset thing, right? You can take it the other way of saying I have nothing to do with the nature side. It was just the roll of the dice, and that was how they kind of grew up, right? But then you also have that same thing of you're the summation of the 5 people you hang around with. And then we also help your kids, who they hang out with and who you expose them to, and that kind of thing. I mean, I chose to take my 2 older kids out of school for 2 days to go see the Starship 6 launch, because I thought that was something that was interesting and eventful and that we get a lot out of, versus 2 random days of elementary school. So I think it's just kind of taking a certain vision on the world and taking the ability to say, like, you can change things, whatever space or length that is.
Yeah.
I think that's just my whole argument. What I think about with agency is it's merely what's the ripple effect of the choice that you make? And I think that you can actually have a larger ripple effect than I think anybody thinks about.
Yeah. Very interesting. There's actually a bunch of thoughts I have on this. So I want to ask you a little bit more about how the longevity space has now sort of been booming. And again, I think longevity comes from this thought experiment of, because we don't know yet that an average person, you keep on hearing this, like the average person is now going to live to 120, 100 and whatever, like people say this, right?
Sure.
It's like, yeah, with our assumption of it, but it's again looking at it from this trend that, you know, we're the best we've been as a society when it comes to the tools that we have, the resources that we have. But again, the concept of living older comes from this experiment of like, hey, I can imagine myself to be healthy at that future age somewhere where I'm at.
Right. Health span versus, lifespan.
That Peter Diaz thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you, like, what are you seeing right now in the longevity? You've talked to Humanoid as well. You know, we've talked a lot about people that are sick, or, you know, even when it comes to psychedelics, like PTSD, like people that have had some trauma before. But what about the vast majority of people that are already okay, but now they want to go the next level and they need more of the positive reinforcement or optimizing side of it? How does Austin play a role in that space?
I think one of the things is, and it's funny because we talk about like longevity, and I feel like that term might be going away only because what is so frustrating, and this happens so often, right? Like, but I feel like it happens more in health, is it gets, all of these terms get co-opted by the snake oil salesman, whether it be, you know, as wellness, whether it be, you know, longevity or any of these kinds of things. I was joking that, like, you know, and if she hears this, that's fine. Like when I ran strategy and product at an at-home microbiome testing and solutions company for a while. And I basically said, whatever Goop is doing, that is the opposite of what we are doing, right? Because it was this exact, you know, non-scientific, I'm just going to throw stuff out there. When there was a moment, I'll never forget this, of like some interesting research came out about how the gut microbiome might have some interesting cancer-fighting effects with chemotherapy. So if your gut microbiome, if you adjust it, it might make the chemo work better. And I'm already reading in my head of like, oh, someone's going to come out and be like, gut microbiome is the cure for cancer. Like, I can see where they're going to go.
Your
with
PR
this.
mind is just sticking off right now.
Yes. So like, yeah, exactly. I was like, I know where they're going with this. And I was like, I'm like, you people suck. And then you see with the wellness, you see with longevity, like the constant thing of like how it's the get rich, like we're going to take this, you know, real stuff and go. And so I do like what's at least happening in Austin, kind of the people that are moving and this kind of connectivity between biohealth and tech. And we're, again, back to this, both the technology and the business model shifting, that we're going to see this kind of experimentation. I haven't so much seen on the bigger side, the straight up, like we're going after longevity, as much as I've seen that in other places like Altos Labs and some of the more like, you know, cellular regenerative places. But I do think, as you talk about like with Humanoid and like Peter Diaz and even and Love Life, like is trying to better define almost what does that health optimization even mean? And how do you, that was one of the things when I had, you know, Jim Donnelly from Humanoid on the pod, like, it's one of the questions I asked him is like, okay, so we know what sick looks like. Like we have metrics and different things, kind of know what healthy looks like as a negative in terms of like, it's not these things and maybe your weight's in this. What the hell does better look like? How do you measure it? Yeah. Right? If we want this to be actually scientific, and especially getting back to like even the more longevity, like, okay, so if you live to 150, I know it's in your health the whole time, we know we've done well. All right, so I'll see in 100 years. And did it work?
Yeah.
And so we're kind of at this weird zone. Now there's companies like, have you heard of Loyal? No. So Loyal is, they're doing longevity for dogs. And they've raised a lot of money. They're not in Austin. I think they might have been Boston. But what is interesting is they might be one of the first ones to actually create the kinds of metrics to get us to better understand what this looks like so that we can say, okay, I don't have to wait till, look, you lived this much longer. We know we did well. So I think that might be a company to watch. But I think that's kind of some of the problem that we're in is kind of, we know some of the good stuff. I mean, the way that, Jim put it well, like, look, do you have more energy? Are you happier? Like the basics of like, I know if I'm healthier, I know if I feel better, that kind of stuff. And we know some of the almost like athletic performance metrics, like is your VO2 max better? Is your testosterone higher? Like those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But we know there's almost something between your athletic metrics and health optimization. There's a there, but I don't think we've quite put our finger on, can I measure your longevity outside of, in hindsight?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Bryan Johnson?
He's interesting. I don't know how much we can take from an N of 1, but I like the experimentation. I think that's the best. Like, I like the experimentation. I don't know how much we can take from it. And I think we'll kind of see where some of this stuff goes. So I follow him on X to kind of see what he's doing. And as things kind of move around, I do feel like he moves the protocols a bunch on some fairly regular. So interesting to see where it goes in like 5 years.
I mean, that's the interesting side of it is I see the same thing. It's like, every few weeks or, a few days, you'll see some new protocol that's come up and it's part of the list of things that he's like now doing. And it goes back to this point. If we are given some data that is against our hypothesis, and at this moment, it is the better thing to do as a behavior change for whatever that might be, brushing your teeth differently. Would we actually exercise our right and change ourselves so quickly to see that, through? He's a walking experimentation of that question, right. I think. It's like, okay, if I see something that's come up really recently and I think this is like the better way to go, would I be open to just testing it out and seeing if this is a thing that actually is going to lead me to that health span that I'm looking for? I think that's an open question.
He's incentivized himself to be able to make those types of quick changes, right? And so that he's got that in, because that's what he's kind of doing. The longevity stack I want to see. Do you realize that Larry Ellison is roughly the same age as Biden and Trump?
Wow.
If you looked at him, you would not think that.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? Like, that's the stack that I want to understand.
Older people that don't look like that, they're that age.
Yes, exactly. So, like, there's something, and maybe it's pure genetics. And of course, now one of the problems we're finding out is, you've heard of blue zones, right?
Yes.
Like these areas. There's some of the things now they're finding out that the reason there might be such great blue zones is really bad record keeping. And they might not actually be as old as we think they are.
Interesting.
So not to say they aren't old, and they're maybe like high, like there's a kind of the balance between like, yeah, they're not all is old and it's not as perfect, but maybe there's something there at the same time. But I think it's one of the things we're also realizing is, and this is off a little bit of a tangent, but just the amount of everything from bad data to outright fraud in the academic literature right now is just so bad.
Yeah, Huberman talks about this too.
Yeah, I mean, and then it's one of the things that really worries me, because I love the idea of, when you think about like AI scientists and AI like research and built off of the corpus of research that we have, but if they're built off of crap, that's not good.
Yeah.
Right? And we think about all of the money and all of the direction that's gone into Alzheimer's research that we realize now has been based off of, faulty and fraudulent, like the plaque hypothesis. That guy should be in jail. Or recently there was another guy that was running the NIH Alzheimer's granting. It was found to do fraudulent work. Like, they should be in jail.
Yeah.
There's billions of dollars in lives that people are being ruined because they were doing fraudulent work.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, no, that's the other side of this whole experimentation.
Yeah, and to your point, it's this agency thing, and it's something like I kind of joke, like my wife, she's like, I had never considered doing this. I'm like, maybe that's why you never reached the top of this. Like you went to the private sector, like maybe that was what happened. Like, you had like the whole thing, like with the honesty study. Honesty study, they cheated and they hacked the data. Like.
Yeah.
Really?
Have you seen this happiness study at Harvard? It's the longest study done on human health and happiness. What constitutes well-being for humans?
It sounds familiar, but I don't know.
It's like in the 50s. I might be messing out on the year, but I think it's like a 70, 85-year running project to this date. In Harvard, they took a randomized group of, I think, 1,000 people, not just in one neighborhood. They went to a poor neighborhood and even a rich neighborhood, and they sort of just tracked them, and every year had check-ins with them across 70 years. Some of them have passed away, and this was during college. People in that age group, I think like 18, somewhere around there. So they tracked them on like, how do you feel about your life? How do you feel about work, community, this, that. The single biggest thing that they found that led to human health and happiness was community. It was,
I was going to get friendships, but
it was the quality, not even quantity, but quality of friendships that they had with your friends, but also your family, your relationship with your family. So, I mean, if you put that in the mix and you talk about longevity, I think we're also in this epidemic of loneliness at the same time.
Yes.
So focusing on just the outwards metrics that we can track, like, running or going to the gym or whatever, is not the only piece of this puzzle of longevity, right, which I think they kind of overlooked. To end this, I have a pitch for you, since you're an investor. So I'm at this program at UT Austin. I want to get your thoughts on this, honestly, feedback. So, a team of 6 of us at UT Austin, we're in this program called MSTC. It's a MS program in technology commercialization. And while we were going through this process of finding technologies that could potentially be commercialized, we came across this pain point that there's a lot of dormant technology and research that's lying across the universities in the US. Most of them are not picked up. Some of these things are like quantum computing that is now becoming a thing.
Yeah.
But the research papers on that were written in 1930s, 1940s, and they only now got picked up after people started looking more into this. And we're like, that's interesting, because we found it really hard to find technologies and the patents on colleges as well. You had to go to every college to find their database, and everything's written in their own way based on their college. So we're like, what if we created a pitch book for university IP? So all the universities in the US that have tech transfer offices that actually do this process of taking technologies to market, we have a single place where investors or potentially very early stage VCs can look at this research, or even some of these like technologies already built up that they could possibly invest in. So a pitch book for university IP is the question.
The issue isn't necessarily finding it.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is getting it out. It might be interesting to your point, like, okay, I go on, I'm looking for XYZ, right? But by the way, I'm usually not, as an investor, right, in this kind of case, I'm not hunting for a specific tech. So I wouldn't necessarily, as you said, like going out, but like, okay, if I am hunting for a specific tech, right, it's more likely than an entrepreneur doing that. And I'm like, I need this thing, and then I got to go, and I'm like, oh, the University of Rhode Island, which I've never would have thought about, has this particular tech. That might be interesting. The question is, I'm giving you the real-time feedback that's like that. Why necessarily wouldn't just looking for papers do the same thing? But the real bottleneck then is, okay, now that I found it, I have to extract it and get it out of the University of Rhode Island. I don't know why that was the one that came to mind. Generally speaking, and I've said this both privately and publicly, so I don't care if it's on the podcast, university tech transfers, minus like 5 of them, suck.
Mm-hmm.
They are impossible, like, to get these things out of. They make it very, very difficult. The way I always kind of put it is, there's 2 ways of thinking about the tech transfer office. They can either be a process function or a value add function. In a process function, their KPIs is how many things and how fast do I get it out. If in a value function, it is what do the deals look like? How much value do we get for each deal? I'm going to say 99.99%, probably 100, but I'm sure someone would point to a difference. They all are structured as value processes, right? Every deal is unique. We're going to go do this. They should be process functions. Get everything out the door so that you can then go and let the people who actually are going to put money on the line make the choices. Because, okay, if I'm going to go get this particular, percentage, this royalty out the door, and I only get 10 things out the door, well, you better hope one of those 10 things makes it through. Versus I get 1,000 things out. I don't care if, well, fine, if 999 fail, but the one go through and becomes a big hit. If I got 10 things out, your percentages are a lot, harder. That one of the 99 is in that 10.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's the generalized problem. I wonder if you back to the IP and, like, even the way that you may have discovered these things, like, wouldn't you find the same technology just by going through papers?
The problem we've seen is the agency that people have, especially there were two kinds of markets, VCs and venture studios. Again, venture studios because they are...
This is more likely for venture studios that I would see. A VC is not going to go hunting for tech. So this is the, I want tech to go build around. So yes, there's
for
a
sure,
studio.
For sure. Is this awareness problem of knowing where to look. And that's like, there's too many papers out there. But the difference in the tech transfer office is that some of them at least have gone through the vetting process to be ready to commercialize. So they're past a certain stage of patenting already done. So if you are interested in licensing at that time, it is probably the stage at which you would take just a paper or research to a company. So that's the stage where it's at compared to a paper.
Right. But are you thinking about for things that are ready to go, or are you thinking about things that are sitting on the shelf?
No, these are IPs that are already listed at universities, so they're more or less ready to go in some way, shape, or form. The thing is that a lot of the research that's happening is not happening for a problem, right? That's the drawback of, well, for a business person. A researcher is doing it for their own curiosity of a particular thing, and if it goes to something that's just an add-on, it's not for the sake of a problem. It's for the sake of a curiosity to make it into something.
See, I think there might be more value for the things that essentially the tech transfer office isn't doing. So I know like UT, like they have their whole, the Discovery Impact has their stuff like, here's our list of everything that's ready to go.
Yeah.
And you're right, not everybody's kind of that set up, but I think it'd be more interesting is because theory, I haven't tried this on like Perplexity, but in theory, something like Perplexity could go and find that stuff if you worded the prompt correctly. Like, I'm looking for this kind of stuff at the universities. Can you go find it? But for the stuff that's sitting on the shelf that, hey, this interesting technology that was developed in 40 years ago, but now has relevance.
Yeah.
But of course, the tech transfer office has no idea. But if that could be surfaced, and you're right, it's going to require somebody to really dig down into this, that might be more interesting. And that would go, you could see that going beyond the venture studios. That'd be anybody going like, I need something that would augment this, that, or the other way.
Yeah.
How can I find technology that essentially exists in some form, but I didn't know that, and it's sitting there ready to be taken, and nobody's pitching it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that feedback.
Yeah.
I'm just curious of your thoughts since we're also focusing on life sciences. So firstly with life sciences IP, that's all around. And, venture studios is one thing. Corporate R&Ds are also another side of it. They want to sometimes just buy versus build.
Right.
So, well, thank you for joining. And thank you for sharing your thoughts on Austin as an ecosystem. Where can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at Austin NX Podcast, and the podcast as well as Austin Next Podcast.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.